Good morning, everyone. It is January 27th, and Councilmember Folkerts and I are here to recap last night's meeting, our January 26th special meeting and study session. Lauren, would you like to start us off and just give us your impressions of the meeting last night and some of the decisions we made?
Thanks, Nicole. I wish I was more excited about our meeting last night. As far as the votes go, they all mostly went the way I was hoping, but there was sort of this overriding frustration for me on each of these things. Yes, we are moving the ball forward, but the amount of effort it is taking to get sort of the amount of progress is pretty frustrating. Our first issue of the night, or one of the big ones, was the appointment of the police oversight panel members. And ultimately, after the third meeting of addressing this issue, we did appoint the recommended members, but in the process, two of the members that the appointment committee had recommended dropped out. And so we appointed 6 new members, and we should have also appointed 4 reserve or alternate members. And we were only able to appoint 2 because we've already, before the appointments have even been made, gone through half of the alternate members. So that just sort of speaks to how difficult this process has been for the people involved. And as we talk about looking at this ordinance and looking at some of the rules around the police oversight panel, I really hope that this is something that we can address to make this process less difficult for the people who apply for it, for the community, for everyone involved.
The people that we are trying to get on this panel are people who have lived experience with disproportionate policing. And that means that they're coming with probably some fear, some trauma, even stepping into this space. And I feel like we had a failure to recognize just what it takes for people to put themselves forward for this particular board. I think for anyone, it's hard to open yourself up to this level of public scrutiny. But for folks who have had not so great experiences with policing, to put themselves in a situation where they've got 15 or 20 police officers kind of standing up and staring us down as we're considering an appointment decision, that's a really hard place for us to put people. And I think it's really intimidating to exactly the people that we really don't want to intimidate, because we want their voice, we want their representation. So I'm hopeful that we can make some changes and that the police oversight panel, working with city staff, can find a better way to do this moving forward, because the whole process just felt very intimidating. And I really did not like how we gave voice to a very small group in the community, and the way that they were dragging some of the applicants through the mud. However we feel about those applicants, that is not an appropriate way for us to do these board appointments, especially this one.
The initial vote of questioning whether or not the panel fully understood the requirements and had applied those to the applicants, that is a vote that I regret. I would have done that differently, because so much of what you talked about, I think that vote right there heightened the level of scrutiny on this in a way that was really unfair to the people involved, and just showed a lack of trust that was not deserved. I apologize for my role in this situation.
I join you in just apologizing to everyone involved for the way that we opened up a lot of the panelists and the current panelists and the applicants to an unnecessarily long and distrustful situation. So I hope we can all do better as we move forward.
One of the other issues that was near and dear to my heart that we discussed last night is the ADU ordinance and some adjustments there. And again, I'm really excited for the way that discussion went and for the changes that are going to be brought forward. We decided to split the ADU work into things that were easier to move forward more quickly, and things that needed more public engagement and, you know, would have more public pushback, essentially. This first section of ADU rule changes has to do largely with making the administrative side of the ADU ordinance easier to administer, and also easier to apply for. So taking away the saturation limit is the biggest one. That's really exciting. Changing how we calculate square footage so that it matches how we calculate square footage everywhere else in the city, which isn't, there's like 3 different ways you calculate square footage on a house when you're applying for a building permit. So that alone is not straightforward, but we definitely didn't need a 4th. My understanding is that this also includes some simplification. Right now, there are things like you have to apply and then you have a year before the project needs to be completed. And anyone who's built something in this community in the last decade can tell you that that is a really hard thing to do. Extending that to a 3-year time frame, looking at things like right now we have a rule that requires the main home to be built first, and then after it's that main residence is occupied, then you can construct an ADU. But if you're starting from scratch, it makes sense to just do both at the same time. So along with, I think we have rules that require the aesthetics of the ADU to match the main home, which is just why. So a whole variety of things, but what we didn't get to was parking and number of ADUs, and there are a lot more things that I was hoping that we would be looking at as part of this ADU discussion, and those will be for another time. But I'm really excited because there's a lot of interest on planning board and on the housing advisory board to keep pushing some of those forward, and I'm here for it.
Yes, I agree. It did feel like it was a step in the right direction, moving towards some housing policy changes. And I think, like you, I was just left a little discouraged by the pace at which we are approaching all of this. We are in a housing crisis, and it is a crisis. There are not enough homes for everybody who needs a place to live, and we are seeing the impacts of that. I really would like to see us making some faster moves in some of these areas because we don't really have time to waste.
And while ADUs aren't going to fix everything, there is a lot of data to support how important ADUs can be in the overall scope of sort of affordable housing options. One of the things I wanted to clarify around ADUs, just for the community, is everything we were talking about last night doesn't impact the amount you can build on a property. And I know that that sounds a little confusing, right? Because someone's adding an ADU potentially, but we have a ton of building requirements that are around how much square footage, how much building coverage, which is basically like if the rain falls on the property, what falls on the dirt versus what falls on a building. And, you know, between all of ADUs don't have any exemptions for those rules. So if you can add an ADU, if you can add 800 square feet as an ADU, that person alternatively could have done an 800 square foot addition to their house. So we're not increasing the amount of residential floor area that people can build on their property. We're just changing what they're allowed to do with it. And so that's one of the reasons that I keep pushing for sort of bigger changes, because for me, it's about efficiency and how we're using the space that we're building. So especially with attached ADUs, a lot of those are taking existing homes and just allowing a bigger portion of that to be divided out as an ADU, which is really like a great environmental way to go about creating more housing in our community.
it feels like the longer we kick this can of creating more housing down the road, the worse situation we're going to be in. And I was thinking about this particularly with a lot of the migrants who've been coming into the Denver area over the last few weeks. Right now, we're seeing economic refugees from Central and South America. In the coming decades, we will start seeing climate refugees. And how do we start doing what we can now to prepare for that different reality that our successors are going to be living in? I think about this a lot because it really, the decisions that we make now, knowing what's coming in the future, are going to have a massive impact on how able future Boulderites are to adapt to the climate crisis, the refugee crisis, the economic crisis, everything that's going to follow, because we are basically living through a time of climate disaster.
Nicole, do you want to talk about some of the things that have been going on in the community, some other maybe more exciting things that we've heard about?
Yes, definitely. So one of the things, Lauren, you joined me at the other day, which was joining the Starbucks workers as they formed the first Starbucks union in Boulder, which was very exciting. I think it is the second in Boulder County and maybe the 9th in the state. I love seeing people in our community getting involved and engaged and organized and showing up for each other and just working to make our community stronger. So that was really wonderful. Also, I heard that one of our Boulder residents, Jennifer Ochs, was selected to be Miss Wheelchair Colorado for 2023. So that's really exciting. And she will be going to the National Miss Wheelchair America event in August, representing the entire state there. So that was really cool. Lauren, talk a little bit about what's coming up in our next couple of meetings.
You know me, always around the building and development stuff. We have a couple of sort of, again, big but small issues there. We're looking at the use table and site review criteria. These are both things that we've talked a fair amount about already, but hopefully we're in the final stretch and we can approve something. Do you have any things that coming up that you want to chat about or make people aware of?
Yeah, I'm interested in what I think is going to be a discussion of modifications to our legislative policy agenda at our meeting on the 9th. It looks like that's going to be turned into a special meeting so that we can have a public hearing on our legislative policy agenda. A couple of the things that I asked for, I think some others were supportive of bringing back into this discussion on the 9th is talking about the statement in our legislative policy agenda that says we will oppose state efforts to limit cities being able to enact a camping ban. And there are so many negatives in that statement. I think it will open up a discussion about the camping ban and what our policy is on it that hopefully will be informative. And the other thing that we asked them to bring back to talk to us about is taking a firmer stance on healthcare affordability, specifically around single payer healthcare. The other thing that I think will be coming up is whether there are any modifications we can make to some of the statements we have about reproductive health and reproductive rights. Is there anything else that you've heard coming up in our legislative policy that you think will be interesting?
Yeah, so after the governor's State of the State address, he made really clear that housing is one of his top priorities. And one of the things that's been talked about is there going to be state legislation that takes away some local control over housing policy? And that's not the way I would ideally frame that, because it's more around trying to make sure that the tools that are needed to address both our housing crisis and our climate crisis, because these things are very closely tied together, that people have those options open to them in their communities. But I think that there is going to be a discussion of how much Boulder is interested in supporting that. And then we had a bunch of community members at our last council meeting really push for the council to look at signing on to the nuclear prohibition. Thank you, everyone who joined us for this episode of the Boulder Council Breakdown. I look forward to seeing you all next week.